What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt. If you haven't joined me before in this podcast, I go really deep on very specific topics in the current limited format. And this week, we are going to do kind of a grab bag of cards that I have my eye on, cards that I've had some experience with this week. So over the course of Tarkir, I've got 5 episodes under my belt, and I was able to tie in individual card evaluation or like deck evaluation into like larger discussions on various archetypes like aggro, mid-range, etc. I think the well is kind of run dry for me on that in terms of Tarkir, especially because it was never my plan to cover every single deck in the format. But, you know, I expected that going in. I knew that the more like broad picture discussions weren't going to be fruitful forever. And I'm actually really excited to talk about just a laundry list of some pretty sweet undervalued cards. So I'm going to go on Wooburg order and let's jump in. So starting with white, before I go in depth on these white cards, I want to shout out an article written by someone named Beers SC. He's kind of like a notable player in the like online limited space. Limited Level Ups shouted out his article this week too. It is called The 100% Definitive Way to Draft Boros. And you can rightfully deduce that it has a lot of hot takes in it. But I think it's a really well-written article. It goes really in depth on a lot of card choices, a lot of which are really surprising. I will link the article in the episode description as well, so you can read it. It's just a Google Doc. So he paints a picture of white-red more as a flurry deck than a go-wide deck. And that's mostly just off the back of the concept of double spelling is good. So he paints a very specific picture here. Says like you should never put black sources in your deck to cast black cards. Just completely ignore the black cards and draft Boros, which I tend to think is not 100% true. And there's a lot of things I disagree with, but if you kind of read the article and shift your mindset into the mode of drafting like that, I think the deck that he paints is very good. And if you're like all in on it, it works very, very well. I just like to keep myself a little more open than that. So I would recommend checking out that article. I'm just going to talk on my own experience from here on out, but a lot of it was influenced by this article over the course of this week. There are very few actual go-wide payoffs in this set. There's not like a Trumpet Blast or an Inspiring Charge that can pump your whole team at instant speed. We do have War Effort and Duty Beyond Death at uncommon. War Effort is the 4-mana enchantment. Duty Beyond Death is like the instant in white where you sack a creature and give your team +1/+1 counters. So your aggro deck is often winning by going wide, but the important part is more that you play something with a very low curve. So in his article, Beers doesn't actually like Bearer of Glory. That is the 2-mana 2/1 first strike on your turn with the team pump effect. And if you view the deck through his lens of it's more of a low curve flurry deck than a go wide deck, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like this is a fine 2-drop, but you don't really want to activate the ability in a lot of spots. Like you will to get more damage, but in my experience with the card, it's not really what is winning you the game, is the couple extra points off this activation. So I still like that card a decent amount, especially if I'm in a go wide space, but I've bumped up like Jeskai Devotee, I think is significantly better than that, even in a lot of go wide decks. So one card that he shouted out that I got a lot of experience this week, and I'm actually really in on, is Poised Practitioner. This is 3-mana 2/3, and then it has a flurry ability. When you cast your second spell, you scry one, and it gets a 1/1 counter. They print a lot of these 3-mana 2/3 that grows, and they're usually really bad. So I ignored this for the first couple weeks of the format, but I've been playing it a lot this week, and as long as your curve is very low, like you have like 10, 11, 12 2-drops and some 1-drops, I think this card is excellent. It grows on turn 4 to a 3/4, and the scry is actually really relevant in an aggro deck, especially if you can trigger it a couple times. Like an aggro deck really wants to avoid flooding, And Poised Practitioner is a way to avoid flooding by scrying those lands to the bottom, kind of in the mid to late game, which really helps you double spell turn after turn. So I've had this thing become like a 5/6, a 6/7. I really like this card. It's kind of a staple of my red-white decks now. Just make sure to keep your curve really low. The other card that I've bumped way up this week is Rebellious Strike. This is the 2-mana instant in white. It's +3 to a creature, and you draw a card. And this also goes along with the concept of the white-red deck more as a flurry deck than a go-wide deck. Now, this card is great in go-wide decks. You can put it on a mobilized token to trade up. It pushes damage on an unblocked attacker. But just being a 2-mana cantrip that lets your guys trade up, that really helps your deck keep churning through the mid to late game. The extra damage boost, like I said, is awesome. Yeah, I think this card is great. You should definitely have your eye on it. I don't think you need to take it highly, and I don't think you will, because it's an effect that's usually not very good. But I'm very happy with the first 2 copies in basically every red-white deck. So moving on to just a couple more random white cards that weren't necessarily mentioned in the article. They're kind of in a different vein. There's the card Lightfoot Technique, which is the combat trick that's +1/+1 counter, flying and indestructible for 2 mana. I don't think that this card fits in many of the straightforward red-white aggro decks, but where I do like it is with double strikers. So if I end up in a spot where I'm like a Jeskai deck and I have Jeskai Brushmaster, which is the 4-mana Jeskai card that's a 2/4 double strike prowess, or Equilibrium Adept, which is the 4-mana 2/4 again, you exile the top card and you can play it until your next turn, and then it also has double strike if you flurry. If I have a couple of these cards, which is not a common thing, I love Equilibrium Adept. Don't love Jeskai Brushmaster, but sometimes they're okay. Like sometimes you're a more mid-range Jeskai deck and you need a way to push damage. I think this card's pretty good. Lightfoot Technique goes way up because you can get a really big damage burst off a flying double striker. Coordinated Maneuver. This is the 2-mana instant at common in white. It's deal damage to a creature equal to the number of creatures you control or destroy target enchantment. This is another one I've come way up on in my red-white aggro decks. This is kind of a go-wide payoff, though you don't really need that many creatures to kill most things. Like I've mentioned before in this podcast, there's no like Ketradons, like 6/6s in this format that you really need to kill. So like just having 3 or 4 creatures is going to kill most things that you care about. And also, theoretically, nobody else at the table should want this card. Now, I think most tables are probably going to have 2 Boros Drafters. But you two, the Boros Drafters at the table, are going to be the only ones that should be playing this card. And I think it's actively very good in the low to the ground aggro decks. Lastly, in white, I want to touch on Loxodon Battle Priest. This is 5 mana 3/5. At the beginning of combat, put a counter on another target creature you control. I think most of us thought that this card was going to be really good at the start of the format, and it really fell flat. It does not line up with the go wide plan at all. It does not really work on a wide board with a bunch of small creatures. But where it does shine is if you have evasion. So specifically in white, there's flyers. Sun Pearl Kirin, which is the 2-mana 2/1 flash flying with the bounce ability. I had a deck with 2 or 3 of these, which is really lucky. That card is very good. And I was suddenly very happy to play a Loxodon Battle Priest because the 2/1's going to peck in for a lot of turns. And if you have like a critical mass of flyers, the +1/+1 counters are going to be more reliably placed on creatures with evasion. So in a similar vein, if you're in the Tempest Hawk deck, Loxodon Battle Priest, I think, is pretty decent with Tempest Hawks. You do have to be careful in those decks about which 5-drops you play, because often when you're playing Tempest Hawks, you just want to play Tempest Hawks for the rest of the game. You don't really want things above 3 mana. You want to be really picky, but it can be a fine card there. And then Jeskai Monument. If you're in kind of like a mid-range Jeskai deck, you're really happy to play Monument. I think Jeskai Monument's one of the better ones. That gives you 2 1/1 flyers. The Battle Priest, again, can be pretty good. So don't love the Battle Priest, but I found spots where I am pretty happy playing it. All right, moving on to blue. I have just one blue card I want to talk about, and that is High Spire Bellringer. This is a 3-mana 1/4 flyer, and it makes the second spell you cast each turn cost 1 less. This is not a great card, but I have played a bunch of them so far, actually, in both red, blue, and green, blue. Basically, you should think of this as turning your Unending Whisper into Gitaxian Probe. Unending Whisper is the cantrip with Harmonize. So I'm not interested in Highspire Bellringer unless I have a ton of 1-mana things to do in blue. And in blue, that's almost always going to be Unending Whisper. So if I have a bunch of cantrips, I'm pretty happy playing this. And the free cantrip aspect is pretty significant. Also, if you can get these in multiples, not that I'm super happy to play multiples, the cost discount becomes very real. It's kind of a sweet card like that. Not a high priority, not a card I'm super happy with, even if it is good. But if I'm a blue-red or green-blue deck with a decent amount of churn, like cantrips, and my curve kind of looks like a bunch of like 4s and 5s and then a bunch of 1s and 2s, I think it's a pretty decent thing to play. It's also really good with Wild Ride, which is a personal favorite of mine. It's an evasive body that can wear the +3 in haste very well, and it's Wild Ride is another 1-drop to discount your more expensive spells. So moving on to black. I still don't have a ton of experience with black. So the 2 cards I'm going to talk about in black are a little more theory crafting. The first card is Kin Tree Nurturer. This is the 3-mana 2/1 with enters Endure 1. I don't know that I've put this in a deck yet, but I've seen a lot of discussion about it, specifically in respect to the data. So if you filter by archetype, so if you go to like the 17 lands page and you look at the stats only for green, black, and white, black, green, black, or white, black, so not full Abzan, not Mardu, etc. The stats are way more decent than you would expect for this card. Like this is like a top 4 or 5 common in green, black, or white, black. I think if you're in a heavy black deck, I think this is the bread and butter common creature for those decks. Green, black, it wears a counter. White, black, it makes an extra guy. You know, exactly what you want. So I, to be honest, do not have much experience with this card or those decks in general, but it's something I have my eye on as like, if I'm in those decks, I think I would happily play all the copies I could get. Along with that, something else I haven't done, but I have my eye on is Worthy Cost. This is the Bone Splinters variant. It's black for sack a creature, exile a creature. The way I see black-white, this should be the reward for being in black-white, similar to how Coordinated Maneuver in white-red is a card that no one else at the table should want. Worthy Cost, if you're in black-white, no one else should be in black-white, first of all, and no one else should be looking to cast Worthy Cost. Now, I don't think this is always going to be the case because I think people wildly overrate Bone Splinters effects in general, just the sack a creature, destroy a creature. But at a table with good players, you should be able to get these on the wheel, get these very late, and I think this is kind of the key to making black-white work, even though I haven't done that yet. So it works beautifully with Kin Tree Nurturer, which makes another body. Like I said, yeah, I really have my eye on this. Also, black-red, something that I want to try to figure out. Worthy Cost works with all the red mobilized creatures in black-red, like Shock Brigade. So I would guess that Worthy Cost is one of the secrets to making like the black-white, black-red, like Mardu heavy black go wide decks work. A couple of cards in red. First, I'm going to talk about Underfoot Underdogs. This is the 3-mana 1/2 that comes with a 1/1, and then you can pay 1 mana, tap it, and give something with power 2 or less unblockable. I am admittedly not a fan of this card. I will point out it's another thing that makes 2 bodies if you want to play black-red and sack it to Worthy Cost. But I do think that this card gets better if you can cheat the power 2 or less restriction on the unblockable ability. Basically, if you can give something unblockable and then boost its power a significant amount, I think this card ends up being pretty decent. So that's something I have my eye on as like the 20 to 23rd card is like, do I have ways to cheat this restriction with underdogs? So cards like Jeskai Devotee, which gets +1/+1 for Flurry. You can peck in for 3 instead of 2. Equilibrium Adept, which is the 4-mana 2/4 that gets double strike when you Flurry. Double strike damage there, unblockable is good. This also works with Wild Ride. Give something evasion and then you can Wild Ride it. So yeah, you can get pretty creative with the power boosts. Again, not a fantastic card, but I'm really on the lookout for ways to cheat the restriction, and I think it ends up being pretty decent there. Meticulous Artisan. This is the 4-mana 3/3 Prowess, enters, make a treasure. I think if you're in the red-green Tricks deck, that is like not necessarily red-green Stompy, like the deck that's pretty happy with like Mammoth Bellow. You're more in like, you're playing like 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and then filling up on like Sarkhan's Resolve, Fire Inform, Dragon Claw Strike, Wild Ride, those sorts of things. I think this card goes from being pretty medium to actively good and maybe the best common 4-drop. Like, I think if you're in like the dedicated green-red Tricks deck, I think this might be better than Salgu Pummeler. So I also just kind of love this card in general. I've played this in a lot of weird mid-range, but like pretty happy to attack red decks. I think it's pretty good in blue-red. I've mentioned how much I love it with Wild Ride. So basically anytime I'm in a deck where I want to use Wild Ride, I think this card is really good. Think it's terrible in white-red. Just not the kind of card you want in that sort of deck. But yeah, I've been bumping this card up a little bit and it's felt pretty good. The last red card I want to talk about is Breaching Dragonstorm, which is the 5-mana Dragonstorm with the Dragonstorm, like pick it up when a dragon enters text. And it's the one that kind of like discovers 8. Obviously, this card is great in the Dragonstorm, like the Globe deck, like the 5-color Soupy Dragons deck. But I want to talk through this deck that I drafted the other day, which I think is a pretty niche scenario, but I also think it was pretty cool and pretty good. I was basically white-red Flurry. I had a couple Poised Practitioners. I had a couple Wayspeaker Bodyguards, which is the 4-mana 3/4. When it enters, you get something back with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard. And it has Flurry tap something. So it was kind of like this, not super aggressive, but like was curving 2, 3, 4, and also wanted to double spell. And I also ended up with 4 dragons in my deck. So that included 3 of the Riling Dawnbreaker, which is the white common omen, where the omen is you can make a 2/2. And I didn't think my deck was amazing, so I kind of wanted to just try this for science because Breaching Dragonstorm triggers Flurry automatically. So it is a spell and then it discovers into your second spell of the turn. So I knew that was automatically going to trigger my Poised Practitioners, my Wayspeaker Bodyguards, etc. And because I had 4 of the dragons in my deck, and the Riling Dawnbreaker could make a 2-drop on 2, I knew that I had some level of certainty that at some point I was going to draw these dragons and be able to do it again. So it was kind of this weird top-end card advantage engine on my aggressive mid-range deck. I'll definitely link this deck in the description. It was very weird. I don't think it's going to come up very often, but it played really well. It unfortunately only went 4-3. I had some really unfortunate games. I think this definitely had the potential to trophy. It felt very strong. But yeah, I think you need both Flurry and dragons. Specifically, the Riling Dawnbreaker worked really well because I was very aggressively making the 2/2 in the early turns just to shuffle it back in for the increased chance to hit it off the Breaching Dragonstorm. So I've talked probably too long about this now. It's not something you should pay attention to, but I thought it was really sweet and kind of emblematic of the weird things that you can get up to in this format with cards that don't look like they should go in certain decks. Moving on to green, I have just one more green card to talk about, and that is Dragon's Brood Relic. This is a 2-mana artifact where it has the Springleaf Drum ability, so you can tap it and tap a creature you control to add a mana. And it also has the Path to the World Tree-esque sacrifice ability for 8 mana to make the dragon that Lightning Helix is something. So I've been being very picky about this card. So ideally, Relic goes in a deck with a pile of 2-drops, like a lot of cheap creatures that are able to tap for it. It's best friends with Anok Wayfarer, which is the 2-mana guy that mills and you can get a land just to help you hit your land drops, accelerate you. I played this in a pretty low to the ground, like green-red stompy deck where I think it's really good there. It does a very good Springleaf Drum impression. And in those decks where you're not really playing for colors, you can often splash the activation off your Sultai or Jeskai devotees, which is pretty sweet because the activating the Relic, I think, is a pretty important part of the card. So like I said, I've been pretty picky about where I play this. Like I'm not taking it highly unless I have a bunch of 2-drops in my deck. But I was looking at the data for this card and I noticed that it's performing at about a B- level, which is way better than I expected for a card that I thought needed a lot of deck building requirements. Usually cards that ask things of your deck don't perform well in the aggregate because people play it in the wrong spots. But this is performing well enough that I actually think I'm wrong on this. Like, you don't need a ton of 2-drops. Like, you don't need like 6 2-drops. You probably want like 4. But it looks like it's fine if you don't have a whole pile of 2-drops. And I think the 8-mana activate mode is a lot better than I gave it credit for. So I'm bumping this in my pick order up quite a bit in every green deck, I think. Because I think the data is telling me that this card is just good on rate. I do want to call out one specific card that I really liked with this, which is Dragonstorm Forecaster, which is the 1-mana 0/3 that can search the globe or Boulderborn Dragon. 1-drops are pretty hard to come by in this format, and this is a 1-drop that is a creature that after you've activated the ability and got all of those colorless things out of your deck, you can still use this to tap the Relic for mana. So I had a deck with that this week that performed really well. And I'm going to finish out the episode with a couple sideboard cards. I think I will go way more in depth on best of 3 next week. There is an arena open on the 17th of May, which is in 2 weekends. But I do want to shout out a couple cards that I think are better in best of 3. One is Arashin Sunshield. This is the 4-mana 3/4 in white. When it enters, you get to exile 2 things out of someone's graveyard, and it has a white tap to tap a creature ability. Obviously, you want to bring this in against graveyard decks, but I actually think the tap ability lines up really well against the graveyard decks too, because the graveyard decks are usually green, and green's thing is often like you have one large creature, and the tap ability is at its best against those decks. So this card is like really bad against white-red because the tap ability doesn't really do anything against a go-wide deck. But if you're playing like against a green deck with a bunch of large monsters, the tap ability becomes actively good and closer to a hard removal spell. In a very, very similar vein, you have Strategic Betrayal, which is the Exile Edict that also exiles their graveyard. Like I said with Sunshield, if you're a green deck, you're more reliant on singular large threats. So the Edict gets a lot better, and it exiling the graveyard can be pretty brutal as well. And the last card I'm going to talk about is the one rare that I will talk about today. I think I might pull out a couple rares next week to talk about too. But I want to talk about New Way Forward, which is the Jeskai rare instant for 5 mana that's kind of like Deflecting Palm. You like redirect all of the damage from one creature to your opponent and you draw that many cards. I think this card is pretty medium in best of 1. Like if you play against Boros and you can only deflect like 3 damage and draw 3 cards, that's not really helping you against the white-red decks. But I get past this decently late, and I've been snapping this up in best of 3, and I think it's very, very good in best of 3. I had one draft where I started this main board and I played against someone who had Roar of the Endless Song and Ureni, which was crazy. And I ended up winning the match, and they resolved both Roar and Ureni all 3 games. And what happened was I was able to put a little bit of pressure on them and get their life total below 10. And then I was able to find this card. I think a couple of the games I was able to Monastery Messenger it back to my top of my library. If they're below 10 life points, they were completely unable to hit me with their Ureni because I was going to prevent the damage and deal them 10. So there was a concern about decking because I think it would cause a draw if they attacked me and I had fewer cards than 10 in my library. but it was a really effective tool for fending off these big stompy decks. And I think that it's a card that if you're in best of 3 and you can either board it out against aggro or board it in against the green decks that are likely to have like a 5/5 or larger, I think this becomes an actively good card. And I think you should take it decently highly if you're in these colors in best of 3. And that's going to wrap it up. I really enjoyed talking through all these cards today. Like I said, the well has kind of run dry on more like big picture deck deep dives, which is as expected. At this point in the format. We have 3 Tarkir episodes left before we're on to Final Fantasy, which is crazy. Things move so fast. I have a vague idea of what I'm going to talk about next week. It's going to be an episode similar to this where I just talk about a bunch of random topics. So if you have anything else that I haven't touched on that you'd like me to cover, please let me know. You can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. You can find me on Discord at samp6. And I also stream very occasionally on Twitch at samp_MTG. Thanks for listening and see you next week.